Somewhere else in the world, where reality was different from the ordinary, hard times came and divided all people into different classes. And now, having gone hunting again, a group of hunters had to face the monsters that began to appear on Earth after the last incident. Faced with the enemy one-on-one, the man who was caught in danger was not going to give up so easily, and took out his weapon and began to fight back. Waiting for the right moment, when the monster was close to him, the man swung his dagger and drove it straight into the monster's mouth. As it continued to feed on the man, the creature tore its wound more and more to be able to swallow the man at a time. However, his efforts ended before he could do everything, and before he could realize his goal, the monster died in a heavy confrontation. Exhaling heavily after defeating the enemy, the man stared at his dead body and said that he had finally defeated the monster on his own, after which someone shouted at him, "Hey, you fool!" After hearing this, the man raised his head again and looked ahead to see many more terrible monsters that his allies had to deal with. The next moment, the same man repeated in a disgruntled voice, "What are you doing there? If you became a carrier, do your job and collect drops." After which another man added that you might be blind and not see the corpses. Continuing to receive dissatisfaction in his address, the man heard you think we hired someone like you to just hang around, to which he nervously exclaimed that he was sorry. After receiving words of apology from his assistant, who did all the dirty work, one of the hunters cried out and said, "You useless piece of shit." Once again, hearing how he was despised, the carrier sighed heavily and said, "Damn. The world has changed since the abyss was discovered." The abyss is a completely different dimension where monsters you can't even imagine in your head really exist. And so, after this strange anomaly called the abyss was discovered, all people began to notice strange abilities that were awakening in them, and with their help, they were able to destroy and explore the abyss. So the evaluation criteria were no longer based on personality or diligence. Only the rank upon awakening mattered, and if you got a high rank, then a good life was guaranteed. Recalling what had happened recently, after which a hierarchy had emerged in society, the guy pulled the core out of one of the defeated monsters and thought, however. Looking at the item he received, the man added sadly, "This is not about me. I am only a carrier who is responsible for the baggage of the awakened and non-awakened, who did not even open the status window until he was 35. Continuing his thoughts, the guy added in his head that as long as I remain like this, I will not see a life similar to theirs. And then turning his head to the allies, he exclaimed, "I have collected all the trophies in this side." Before he could finish his speech, his sentence was suddenly cut short as he saw a horrific picture in front of him. All the hunters were destroyed. Feeling incredibly afraid after what he saw, the guy confusedly said that all the mayors were gone before he could finish, when he suddenly heard someone's voice saying that the last one was left. After hearing this, the man turned his head back to find out who had just spoken to him, and there he saw the very monster. This monster, which destroyed all the hunters in just one moment, was an SSS-ranked monster named Asmodeus. Not wanting to die so easily, the man immediately pulled out his dagger and pointed it at the monster, screaming and trying to harm it somehow. However, he failed to do so at the same moment Asmodeus stretched his hand forward and used magic to tear off the man's limb where he was holding the weapon. Feeling severe pain, the porter immediately fell to the ground and tried to pinch his arm to stop the bleeding, screaming painfully. Continuing to roll on the ground, the man suddenly felt his body freeze and then exclaimed in confusion, looking at Asmodeus, "What is this?" The next moment, the giant monster directed its dense beam of mana toward the man's head to quickly finish him off. As soon as the enemy's attack reached his head, the porter noticed that a river of blood began to flow in front of his eyes, and then, with tears in his eyes, he said frightenedly that it was clear that I was going to die. As he continued to bleed, the man mentally added, "My parents died in a car accident at school, and I was constantly humiliated." Feeling only the despair that was increasingly filling his mind, he added in his mind, "I have been ignored all my life because of my awakening, but I will really die as a common porter." Due to the gravity of the situation, the man could not contain his emotions and began to reproach himself mentally, exclaiming, "Wake up, you worthless loser, you worthless life." As soon as he finished expressing all his emotional impulses, he noticed something strange right before his eyes, and then a voice said that all the conditions for awakening were satisfied. The next moment, he saw a staircase shimmering with a golden hue, going upward, and at the end of it was an unknown white image of a strange person. Not realizing everything that had just happened to him, the guy mumbled in confusion that he was out of his mind. The next moment, in an attempt to figure out what had just happened to him, the man turned his head toward the monster in front of him and noticed that it was not moving. Trying to digest everything that was happening to him, he confusedly said in his head that Asmodeus, he had frozen. After expressing his thoughts, the man heard laughter, followed by the same voice that was getting louder and louder, saying, "You're worried now that Asmodeus has stopped." Immediately after hearing this, the man turned his head to the source of the voice, and looking at the bright white image approaching him, he asked in confusion who you were. In response to the question he had just been asked, the unknown deity smiled and replied, "Who knows, for some people I am a king, but you should not worry about it." The next moment, the deity sat down next to the chair that appeared out of nowhere and rested his head on his hand and said, "From this moment on, I give you power." Continuing to wonder what was happening to him, the man thought in surprise that the king was in power. What was he talking about? He was the same as Asmodeus. In response to the man's involuntary stream of thought, who continued to try to comprehend what was happening, he felt it was wrong to be so suspicious. As he began to demonstrate the full power of the deity, he added, "I was impressed by your will and diligence, and that is why I chose you." Continuing his words, the king added, "But you better think that such a miracle will never happen again." Hearing this, the man exclaimed in confusion that he had chosen me. Seeing the deity stretch out his hand in front of him to stop his flow of words, the man again asked what the hell was going on, to which the deity slyly smiled and replied, "Just wait patiently for the day when everything will fall into place." Starting to use his divine power, the king, who suddenly appeared in front of the man, disappearing in a bright white light, added, "Then we will meet again." As time continued to pass, a giant monster loomed over the man and was about to swallow him. Then the deity added my key. The next moment, the man saw a bright light in front of him and then someone's voice, and he thought that the voice was right after someone said, "Hey, this fool is sleeping, the crazy bastard. Now he's completely ignoring us, so we should wake him up in the morning." Immediately after these words, the boy felt someone slap his face, followed by a voice shouting and a blow. As soon as he regained consciousness after the sudden blow, which he did not expect, the boy heard that he had now regained consciousness. Continuing to hold his victim by the collar, one of the ruffians said arrogantly, "God only gets to you with fists," after which the guy was surprised to think that Baek-soo was the one. As he continued to think about the situation he was in, he thought about how the bullies from high school had ended up here, and then he heard Tae Hyun's boogeyman, "Why don't you answer me?" And then he added, "I was definitely in the abyss right now." While being beaten by the boys from the school, Tae Hyun was surprised to add in his head, "Wait a minute, the authorities." The next moment, turning his head to the side, the boy accidentally noticed his status window with the name Kim Tae Hyun, 19 years old, rank F, skill cabin. Immediately after realizing what he had just seen, the guy said in surprise the status window was 16 years ago then it means. Finally realizing what had happened to him, the boy laughed out loud, causing the hooligans to freeze in place in confusion. Pushing back the guy who suddenly laughed, Bahin-soo exclaimed in surprise that he had gone crazy with this sod. Continuing to hear him laugh, ignoring all his words, the bully swung his fist and shouted, "Hey, you rascal! You really want to get hit in the face like that?" But while he was shouting, Kim Tae Hyun had already started to act and struck first, throwing the robber back, and seeing that his friend had already been hit by another hooligan, Baek-soo exclaimed in fright. At that very moment, Kim Tae Hyun, still smiling after realizing everything that had happened to him recently, mentally mumbled that this meant that I was too. While preparing to fight back against the bullies who insulted him in high school, the boy continued to smile and woke up. At that very moment, after the confident confession, the pair of hooligans froze in place, not understanding what had happened to their victim. The next moment, the rest of the robbers who decided to show the guy where he belonged activated their skills and shouted out to Tae Hyun, "You're crazy, you're nothing." But even they could not do anything to the guy who had just returned from the future with new abilities of an awakened person. In this way, Tae Hyun was able to deal with two other bullies who had been insulting him throughout high school. At the moment of the fight with his rivals, Tae Hyun thought, "For 35 years, I've been doing my best." Continuing his thoughts, the boy imagined his body and the channels of mana circulation in it, and then mentally added up the results of his general physical training. Continuing to recall everything he had learned in his past life, the boy added to the study of all the information about monsters and the abyss of knowledge about various skills in his head. Listing in his head all the things he had to study in order to at least somehow compensate for the lack of awakening, he mentally added even martial arts skills. The next moment, again focusing his attention on his opponents who were approaching him, Tae Hyun added in his head, "That's why I can't lose to such weak idiots who don't even know what they are." Dodging the attacks of his opponents, who attacked him one by one, the guy neutralized them and added the most primitive basics in his head. After finishing the fight against 3 school bullies, the boy, warming up his fists, said he needed to resume his training. As soon as he said this, Baek Hek-soo came to his senses nearby and asked him in displeasure that he was awakened, saying, "You're a bastard, Tae Hyun." Immediately after he said that, the guy activated his stone skin ability, which strengthened his body with the help of skin growths, and shouted, "Now you're going to die." As soon as the threatening words were uttered, the man immediately tried to strike at his opponent, but he failed and was able to dodge with ease. When the first attack failed, the guy jumped into the air and tried to make a hammer blow with his hands in a lock. After avoiding the enemy's attack, Tae Hyun waited for the right opportunity and tried to counterattack, but his attack failed miserably. As soon as he struck the enemy's face, all he felt was pain in his arm and Bae Hae-soo's supercilious voice asking, "How are you doing?" The next moment, noticing that the enemy was about to strike back, Tae Hyun quickly moved the redhead to his side and put up a block, thinking, "I only hurt myself trying to hurt him." Immediately after his thoughts, he felt an enemy attack hit him, throwing him back into the air. As a result of his opponent's punch, the guy landed in the wall and destroyed it with his body, sustaining many injuries. The next moment, as he began to approach his opponent, whom he had just defeated, Bae Hek-soo laughed ominously and said, "You probably didn't know your limits if you got into all this, so come to your senses, you idiot." Continuing to demonstrate his arrogance, the guy smilingly added, kneading his fists on his way to Tae Hyun, "You inferior awakened fool." The next moment, having covered his entire body with stone armor and prepared to continue the battle, he added that, "Now you will run away like you just did." As he continued to lie in the rubble of the wall he had just crashed into, Tae Hyun heard or tried to fight with his awakened skills, then thought all awakened. Again starting his reflections on the world in which he now lives, the boy said in his head he was gaining skills and rank. From rank F, who are almost indistinguishable from ordinary people, to rank S, who are called monsters, the skills and physical abilities of the awakened increased exponentially. The next moment, looking at his status window again, the guy added, "But all I got was a skill that I don't know anything about and of the lowest quality." Continuing his thoughts about the injustice, the guy added in his head, "I had no chance against Baek-soo with his rank, but for some reason." As soon as Tae Hyun started to get to his feet at the moment of the surge of incredible strength he felt, he confidently said, "I don't think I'm going to lose." At the same moment, noticing the frightening aura of magic around his opponent that he spontaneously released, Baek-soo exclaimed in confusion, "What the hell was that?" Continuing to be surprised at what he now sees in front of him as a school bully, he added, "Have you really awakened the weakling Tae Hyun?" At the same time, looking at my hand after the sudden surge of power of Kim Tae Hyun's speech in my head, I feel like magic flowing through my veins. Having not received an answer to his questions, Baek Hee-soo, who was simply ignored, angrily exclaimed, "I don't understand what's going on here." The next moment he was in the air and prepared to attack the guy again. He shouted, "But it will all end when you die." When the enemy approached him, Kim Tae Hyun stretched his arm out in front of him, and then his hunting skill was activated. At that very moment, hovering in the air, Baek Soo felt his whole body losing its magical potential and exclaimed that. Continuing to stand in place with his arm outstretched, Kim Tae Hyun continued to draw out his opponent's skill without even realizing what he was doing. As soon as the opponent's skill was fully mastered, a powerful explosion occurred with the help of hunting, which could be seen from the window of the school building, where students were still inside. After this explosion, Baek Hyuk-soo finally lost his strength and fell to the ground, losing consciousness, while Kim Tae Hyun remained standing. The next moment, his opponent fell unconscious to the ground, and Kim Tae Hyun just looked down at him with a tired look. Catching his breath after a tough fight, the guy received a system notification saying that the hunt was over. While his body was slowly learning the new skill, he received system notifications that said, "As a result of hunting a target, your rank has been upgraded to E, and you have acquired a new skill." When his body was completely covered with the wounds he received in the battle against Ba Haik-soo, the boy received another system notification that said he had stone skin. After some time, when it was finally over, the guy gathered all the victims and went to the first aid station to provide them with treatment after the fight, where they were met by a surprised nurse. Her surprise was understandable because a guy came into her office dragging 3 other unconscious people on his back. The next moment, when Kim Tae Hyun arrived at his destination, he raised his head and smiled awkwardly and said, "I welcome you." After the fight, the boy took the children and Baek Soo to the medical office, and the nurse used healing to take care of his wounds. However, it is clear that when Kim Tae Hyun was telling the story, he could not tell the truth and lied about what exactly happened to them. After the girl healed the student, they started a dialogue where she asked how you all got so hurt and heard him falling down the stairs. Of course, he expected to make her do everything without asking questions. As soon as the questioning was over, the boy was finally able to leave the school building and head home thinking, "Now I'm fully recovered, and it's great. I've awakened and taken revenge on Baek Soo." But as he continued on his way home, he still could not let his mind rest, thinking the problem was in. Feeling his body enveloped by that strange skill he had acquired, which he knew nothing about, the boy added the skill of hunting to his mind. The next moment, he continued his thoughts, saying in his head, "I thought I would have to train for the rest of my life, but my rank rose after one single fight." Starting to think about the strangeness that had happened to him, he mentally added a skill that should have remained at F rank, but this power defeated C rank, and I was even able to appropriate the skill of the defeated opponent. As he continued to climb the stairs to his home, the boy thought, "Why did this king give me such power, and why did he send me back so many questions?" After a while, when he arrived at his destination, the guy stopped in his tracks and looked up at himself and thought, "There is something I have to do." Looking at his house where he had been living lately, Kim Tae Hyun confidently said in his head to learn more about this hunt. Continuing to look at his house, the guy smiled gently and said, "It's been a long time since I've been home." Immediately after his words, he recalled his family and said, "After my parents died, I stayed with my uncle." Opening the front door and going inside, the guy confidently said he would be back late and could look for information about similar skills. But right in front of him in the house, he saw a guy on his knees and 3 masked men behind him. When he saw the boy who had just suddenly returned home, the son of the uncle who had taken him in surprisedly exclaimed that Kim Tae Hyun was the one who had taken him in. At the same moment, Kim Tae Hyun jumped back because of the sudden meeting with someone he had forgotten about, and exclaimed in confusion to Hwang Ja-yeon, "Why aren't you at school?" The next moment he looked down and noticed a box of money lying on the floor, and he mentally said, "That rascal Jae Yong." Looking up at the rest of the people in the room, he added in his head, "I knew even before my regression that he wanted to be friends with hooligans. He stole all the savings from the house and got into trouble. And then I heard one of the thugs ask who the idiot was, and Jae Yong exclaimed in confusion. Approaching the leader of the group, the guy began to whisper something in his ear, at which time Tae Hyun mentally said, "So it will happen today." As soon as the bandits had all the information, their leader confidently walked forward and said, "Wow, I was wondering who that was, and it was Jane's cousin." Continuing to confidently stomp toward the intruder, he added, "If you don't want to take it, go back where you were going. We'll just take what we need and leave." The next moment, approaching Tae Hyun and putting his hand on his head, the bandit leader looked down at him and added that he had not awakened. In response to the thief's proposal, the boy, making his stroke, said, "I want to protest." After which the leader of the robbers, seeing the boy's quick movement, said in surprise that the next moment after the collision with Tae Hyun's fist, the leader of the hooligans was on the ground after a surprise attack. At the same time, seeing what had just happened, the rest of the room fell into a stupor, wondering what had just happened to their leader. Continuing to perform his combination, Tae Hyun immediately waved his hand after his strike and prepared to continue. At the moment when the gang leader thought he was about to finish the guy off and was stretching his arm in front of his face, the guy screamed out in fright. At the same time, Tae Hyun probably stretched out his hand in front of his opponent's face as Bai Haek-soo confidently shouted, "Hunt," in the fight. Nothing happened after that, except that he received a system notification saying that the hunting skill was unavailable. When Tae Hyun learned that his skill was now inactive and he would not be able to use it, he said in his head that the hunt was not working. The next moment, he was hit in the face by the leader of the bandits, who knocked him to the ground with angry screams from the crazed bastard. As soon as he threw off the attacker, the leader of the bandits turned to his comrades and shouted, "Die!" with his hand outstretched in front of him. When given the command, one of the leader's comrades who invaded the house with the owner's son to steal the money used his C-rank skill called chains. The other bandit was also not standing still and used his C-ranked skill called poisoning in sync with the others. And the leader himself had the magic of a vine with thorns and a C-rank skill called bleeding, which also carried out the massacre of the boy. Thus, all three skills were aimed at Tae Hyun, who happened to return home at a bad time. As soon as the attack hit the target, smoke came out of the building in all directions, through the windows under great pressure. At that very moment, the leader of the bandits, anticipating his victory, said with a grudging smile, how dare he pretend to be awake, and that he should be put in his place. However, not everything was as simple as it seemed. Continuing to stand on his feet in a pile of smoke, Tae Hyun received a system notification that said the skill was detected. At the moment the skill was activated and the same predator absorbed the attacks that were made on its bearer, Tae Hyun received a system notification. The poisoning chain's bleeding was confirmed. Continuing to shield himself with his hands from the enemy's attacks, the guy who had thought he was going to die received another system notification that said that thanks to mystical power, the resistance was successful. When Tae Hyun learned that the enemy's attacks did not work on him, he wrapped his body in stone armor, smiled slyly, and said suddenly it did not work, and reflected the skills as he pleased. Immediately after his words, he again aimed at the enemy leader standing in front of him and added in an ominous tone, "I don't know what exactly is going on." Instantly closing the distance with his enemy, the guy struck him and knocked him to the ground again with his attack. As soon as his attack hit the target, the guy smiled slyly and said confidently, "But this skill is quite strong." After a while, having dealt with all the bandits who were in his house, Tae Hyun looked at their bodies and said, "Well, it looks like it." Left alone in the room with Hwang Jae-yeon, who brought them home, I realized a few things. Looking at the description of his skills, The guy who mentally scrolled through the status window can only see the awakened one. It shows information about the awakened one, but not in full. Having paid some attention to his skill in this window, he added the first amount of mana, which was sufficient, but the hunt did not work. In other words, the activation of the skill is influenced not only by the mana specified in the description. In addition, hunting has a passive effect that was also not in the description. It reflects and negates skills that change the state, such as bleeding or poisoning. Immediately after reflecting on his new skills, the guy put his hand to his chin and said, "Well, I'll be able to confirm my guesses over time." The next moment, turning his attention to the guy in front of him, he added in surprise, "But I'm more interested in something else." Looking at Tae Hyun, who was bowing at his feet after everything that had happened, the boy asked him in surprise what he was doing. In response to Tae Hyun's question, he exclaimed in embarrassment, "Hyungnim, seeing your impressive abilities, I'm Tae Hyun. Your cousin has been reflecting on his behavior. Please forgive me just this once." Continuing to beg for forgiveness, he added, "I'll pretend to be a dog or I'll clean all your shoes. It doesn't matter. I'll do whatever you want." Hearing this, Tae Hyun thought uncomfortably, "What a pitiful sight. I knew this guy was a henchman, but it's not that bad." Continuing his thoughts as Tae Hyun barked like a dog, the boy made a worried expression and thought, however, he is not the main problem now. Starting to think about what else was going to happen that day, he mentally added another event that was going to happen today. The next moment, deciding to stop this ridiculous joking, Tae Hyun said, "I forgive you," to which he confusedly exclaimed that he did. In response to the boy's question, Tae Hyun looked up and confidently said, "You're coming with me." And at the same time, someone arrived somewhere in a place that was closed to everyone and taped to prevent outsiders from entering. Right in front of this very place, they even put up a warning sign that said the area was a guarded zone, and only officials were allowed to enter. So, a certain number of officials had already gathered in that place, most likely, who had come to the forbidden place for urgent needs. Looking around the place to which they were called, someone asked in surprise if this was a gate breach, a phenomenon in which monsters appear from the abyss, and if left unchecked, a catastrophe would occur. Continuing to look at the site of the phenomenon, the man tried to give an answer and said, 10 years ago, the gate opened suddenly from the last rift, so the monsters are circling around." In response to the man's remark, one of the girls replied that judging by the monsters, if everything is left as it is, a catastrophe is inevitable. And then another asked anxiously if we should start evacuating the neighboring areas, to which she replied that it was not worth it. Continuing to stand with his back to the monsters who were trying to break through the gate, the man added, "We have my B-rank barrier skill." Continuing to argue his case as the monsters tried to squeeze through the defense, he added a C rank to the fault. When the barrier was about to collapse from the onslaught of monsters, the man confidently added that the strongest monster from this gate would also be of rank C. Continuing to confidently stand with his back to the monster's gate, the man added, in other words, even in the event of an unforeseen situation, before he could finish, the barrier collapsed and monsters began to break out of the gate with a formidable growl. Seeing this, a couple of his subjects, who were excited by what they had just seen, shouted out to the leader of the group. Instantly reacting to the attack of the monsters that broke out of his protective barrier and defeating several individuals at once with one swing of his leg, the man added, "There are enough ranked awakened ones for this job." At the same time, following Tae Hyun, Tae Hyun said, "Everything should be fine then, sir." Continuing to follow the guy who was in a hurry to get to the place where the unpleasant situation was going to happen, he added, "You said the management team is already there, sir. Then that's good. Yes, sir." To which the guy awkwardly replied, "Where did that come from, sir? Let's get on with it." The next moment, Tae Hyun added, "You're right. From the very beginning, the mana of this gate is at the C rank, and the personnel who arrived there are B rank, so C rank monsters will not be a problem for them." In response to the words of his henem, the boy, trying to keep up, exclaimed, That's exactly what I'm talking about. After the remark of his subject, who volunteered to be him, Kim Tae Hyun added that it was only if it was really a C-rank fault, which caused Hwang Jae-yeon to be concerned. At the same time, the department employee had already dealt with the first wave of enemies who had left the fault gate. Leaning over the bodies of the defeated monsters, the man wiping his face from the blood spatter of his enemies thought something was wrong. These low-ranked monsters were able to break through my B-rank barrier. The next moment, realizing the reason why he could have confused the ranks of the portals, the man looked back in confusion and mentally muttered, "It can't be that the mana coming from the gate is higher than my rank." While he was thinking about the rank of the gate and the likelihood of his mistake, one of his subjects shouted out to the leader of the group, something coming out of the gate. Immediately after she said that, the barrier that was placed on the gate suddenly began to crack, and the head of a large monster appeared from the inside. Seeing this, the three employees of the department just froze in place, watching the monster that exceeded their expectations. When the barrier collapsed from the onslaught of the monsters, all the enemies who had gathered at the gate were freed and could break into the world of people. One of the enemies was the same monster that caused the illusion of the C-rank gate to appear, a giant A-rank ogre. Seeing who it was that had just appeared from the portal, the man from the control room exclaimed in confusion that the gate was not of C-rank. Being at the scene of the collision where high-ranked monsters had just escaped, he added they were A-ranked. At the same time, while continuing to follow his mentor, Hwang Jae-yeon exclaimed tiredly, "Let's assume you're right." Continuing to follow Kim Tae Hyun, he added, breathing heavily, "But it's impossible. How did you even know about all this?" To which he mentally replied, "I just went through all this before, and then heard again, despite the monsters, and the evacuation hadn't even started yet." After listening to all the exclamations of his partner, Kim Tae Hyun, continuing to walk forward, replied that it was all my intuition, to which Hwang Jae-yeon was surprised to hear that. Continuing to prove his point of view, the guy added with absolute steadfastness, "My intuition told me so," to which he heard absolute nonsense in response. Continuing to try to get the truth out of Kim Tae Hyun, he added, "Don't tell me you're trying to play a trick on me." After which a couple of guys heard the screams of frightened people running toward them. Continuing to escape from the monsters that followed them, the frightened crowd shouted out the fault gate. Seeing that the situation Kim Tae Hyun told him was really happening, Hwang Jae-yeon felt overwhelmed with fear, and then his friend asked him, "Do you remember what you have to do? Then start." After receiving the order from his friend, the boy looked back and exclaimed in alarm, "Hen, what are you going to do now?" To which I replied in a surprised voice. Starting to cover his body with stone skin, Kim Tae Hyun confidently walked forward, adding, "I'll deal with these rascals and catch up with you." At the same time, somewhere in the control building, standing in front of the window, one of the members of the organization said, "As you said, the situation is developing quite quickly. The gate that was supposed to be C-ranked turned out to be A-ranked, and it is impossible to send reinforcements because the rest are busy hunting in dungeons and exploring the abyss." Immediately after he said that, the man looked back and added anxiously, "The only possible solution now is an awakened A-rank." Continuing to insist, the man added, "All hope is now on you. Help us solve this problem." Looking at the A-ranked awakened Anhengsu Blade of Madness guy in front of him, he added the Anhengsu Blade of Madness. After receiving a plea for help, the guy who was sent to clear the high-ranking gate shedding tears exclaimed, "Leave it to us. Leave it to me. I am the hero. I am the Blade of Madness, and Hensu is coming." At the same time, somewhere near the gate, Kim Tae Hyun joined the battle and tried to hold back the enemies on his own, to the best of his ability. At the moment of his battle using the hunting skill, the guy smiled slyly and said, "I thought so." After reviewing his characteristics in the status window, he mentally added the activation of hunting depends on the degree of fatigue. It does not activate when fatigue exceeds 70%. The next moment, creating a blue flame of mana in his hand, Kim Tae Hyun mentally said, "Most skills use mana, but that doesn't mean you have to worry about it only because of it." Continuing his thoughts, the boy added in his head that fatigue increases when using a skill or physical activity. And the higher the fatigue, the harder it is to use the skill and move the body. Continuing to fight the enemies that came his way, the guy added in his head, "Of course, it's a shame that there is so much to consider, but I found out that you can restore mana by absorbing destroyed monsters." The next moment, having received a system notification that said the target's life was stopped and there was no mana consumption, you successfully completed the hunt and restored mana, after which he smiled slyly and said, "That's great." After his joyful exclamation in his head, the guy received several more notifications that read, "Now your rank is D. Hunting rank has been increased from E to D. Stone skin rank has been increased from E to D." Continuing his thoughts about his own skills, the guy added in his head, "The more often I use hunting, the stronger I become and the faster I can become even S rank or even SS rank." Having started to attempt something that no one else had managed to achieve, the guy mentally added that he might even become the first SSS rank in the whole world. After finishing the battle with the monsters in the area, the guy said thoughtfully, "Well, I think I've dealt with everything, so I should go back to Huanjai." Before he could finish his thought, he suddenly heard a loud noise and shouting behind him. It was a ranked awakened, fighting against a giant ogre and shouting, "Dirty monster, you will pay for the deaths of innocent people." Continuing his battle, the boy shed tears for the innocent victims of the people who had died because of the gate's appearance. The boy added, "The warrior of justice, Anhensu, will punish you." In response to the boy's shouts, the monster was not going to give up so easily and also swung its fist to crush Anhyunsu. The latter, in turn, swung his sword and struck the enemy numerous times to avenge all the dead people. After all the machinations were completed, a powerful explosion was heard, which proved that the two fighters clashed with each other. At the same time, Tae Hyun, who was not far from the site of the clash, simply froze in place in amazement at what had happened before his eyes. Looking at the aftermath of the collision, he thought he had easily finished off the A-ranked monster, and he was probably also the A-ranked awakened one who had solved the rift problem before my regression. As soon as the smoke cleared, Tae Hyun saw the same awakened man holding the hilt of his sword trapped in the body of a monster, and thought the blade of madness An Hyun's rumors did not lie about its power. At the end of the battle, the boy waved his finger near his neck and said, "The stupid monster died from a blow from my sword of justice." And Tae Hyun's thoughts about stupidity also turned out to be true. Continuing his thoughts, looking at the guy who had just dealt with the A-ranked monster, Tae Hyun added in his head, "But why is An Hyun here?" Continuing to look at the man who had just finished off the monster, he mentally added, "Before I returned, I heard that he had had a bloody battle with a giant on the other side of town at that time." And Hensu folded his hands in front of him and prayed silently, then said, "Citizens, rest in peace." Tae Hyun continued to stare at the strange guy in front of him, and then he received a system notification that said the skill was detected. At the same moment, An Hyun's body was pierced by the blade of a person who had just begun to emerge from the state of invisibility. Feeling a lot of pain, Hensu, coughing up blood, began to slowly turn his head back and exclaimed in confusion, "What the hell?" At the same moment, the attacker laughed slyly and said in an ominous tone to An Hyun, "Well, you're caught." At the same time, following Tae Hyun's orders, Hwang Ja-en had already crossed half the city and arrived at the safe place the leader had told him about. Bringing the girl he had put to sleep with Baeksu's skill, he laid her down on the couch and covered her with a blanket to keep her warm. After following Tae Hyun's instructions, the guy looked at the rescued girl with concern and said in his head, "Everything is definitely fine." Immediately after his thoughts, he suddenly recalled the words of Tae Hyun, who had emphasized during their last dialogue that many people would die today. As he continued to scroll through the details of the dialogue in his head, he remembered what Tae Hyun had pointed out to him, saying that one of them would be our school nurse, Choi Nain. Recalling the events that happened to him in the past, the guy added that he was giving instructions to his subject that she would die because she would be focused on providing first aid and not evacuation. Continuing to instruct Hwang Ja-yeon, the boy added, "You can put people to sleep using the skill of putting them to sleep," and then heard Kim Tae Hyun respond in a confused voice, "Then put Choi Nyan to sleep and take her to a safe place." After giving his subject the priority task, Kim Tae Hyun looked back and added, "I'll take care of the rest." Recalling his conversation with his cousin, Hwang Ja-yeon continued to look at the sleeping nurse and wondered in his mind how Tae Hyun had found out about all this. The next moment, a brilliant thought suddenly entered his mind that could clarify all his questions, and he mentally said, "Maybe." Continuing to think about how exactly Kim Tae Hyun was able to predict everything that was happening, Hwang Ja-hyun said in his head, "It doesn't make any sense, but I have no other explanation." The next moment, looking up, the boy confidently shouted in his head, "Tehen hen ni, tehen hen nim." Finally realizing how his cousin could know all this, Hwang Ja-yeon clenched his hand into a fist and said he had awakened with the ability to see the future, to which he heard no. Continuing his joyful exclamations of guessing his friend's skills, Hwang Ja-yeon exclaimed, "Seeing the future is so cool," and then heard the guy say no, and then the guy added in fright, "It's completely insane." At the same time, he was away from his cousin in connection with the execution of the assignment, and added that everything would go according to plan anyway. As soon as he said this, he was cut off by An Hyun-soo, who had dealt with all the monsters that had broken out of the gate in the past, and then he mentally added something that was definitely not going according to plan. At the same time, grabbing his wound that had just been inflicted on him, An Hyun-hyun shouted out hard, "Who are you? Reveal your identity." In response to the hero's question, the attacker, removing his disguise skill, laughed ominously and said, "You're alive even after being pierced through. How amazing is that? After all, rank A is very different." Continuing to smile ominously, the B-ranked thief Han Sando, who possessed the B-ranked skill of stealth, added, "But this will only make the hunt more fun." After everything that had just happened in front of him, Kim Tae Hyun looked at the man who had just attacked An Hyun and thought that the awakened ones who commit crimes are called thieves. One of these individuals is the thief Han Sando, a maniac who roamed around killing for his own pleasure during the gate breaking. Immediately after his thoughts, Kim Tae Hyun continued to look at the attacker and said in his head that he was sure they had not met before. Feeling that his plan had gone a little differently than he had planned, Kim Tae Hyun thought anxiously, if the future had changed because of me. At the same time, unable to bear such insolence from a thief who decided to attack him at such a difficult time, An Hensu angrily exclaimed, "You are a thief then." Pulling out his holy sword of madness, which he created with the skill An Hensu, he rushed at the thief and exclaimed, "I will punish you with my own hands." Just as he was about to attack the thief, he felt a strange ground shaking that shook his stability on his feet while he was trying to take revenge. The situation was that the A-ranked monster that An Hensu seemed to have killed revived again by regenerating its wound and rushed into battle. Realizing what the reason was, the giant ogre exclaimed in surprise as An Hensu, who had just fallen off the monster's body and was getting to his feet, smiled ominously and added that what an incredible regeneration, which was expected of a ranked monster. When the monster started to swing his arms again to kill the people in front of him, Han Sando jumped aside and said with a sinister laugh, "Well, I can't help it. I'll leave An Hyun to the bastard." Immediately after his words, the thief looked back and smiled ominously and added in a sly tone. Taking in the sight of Kim Tae Hyun, who was nearby and watching everything that was happening, he added, "We have a spectator." Smiling ominously, Han Sando licked the blade of his blade and then exclaimed, "It's just crazy. More victims is just a fairy tale, and now..." Rushing at the guy who was next to him and became his next target, the thief added in a frantic tone, "Die!" Seeing that he was being targeted by one of those who are called thieves, Kim Tae Hyun used his stone skin and created armor at the point of impact, smiled slyly, and said, Cretan. As soon as the enemy's attack was stopped, the guy took advantage of the moment when the enemy was in confusion and stabbed him in the leg. Jumping back after his attack failed, Han Sand angrily exclaimed, "You bastard is awakened then." In response to his opponent's exclamation, who was wiping blood from his lips after a missed shot, Kim Tae Hyun asked Han Sando, a B-ranked thief. Starting to torture himself with his hands, the guy said that he was a psycho who was obsessed with murder and used the skill of stealth. It was true. Activating his stone skin skill to engage his opponent, Kim Tae Hyun smiled slyly and said, "I'm very glad to meet you." As soon as he said this, the enemy, without waiting even a second, immediately attacked the guy to deal with him as quickly as possible. However, his intentions were exposed a little earlier, after which the thief engaged in a fight against Kim Tae Hyun, exchanging blows with a sword and fists. After breaking off the distance after another collision with his opponent, Han Sando laughed slyly and said, "You have enough skills to behave so confidently." Continuing to focus on the guy who possessed the stone skin skill, the thief added, "I knew that bleeding against you would be useless." Continuing his dialogue with the boy while Anhensu was fighting a large monster, the thief added, "I don't know how you got this on me, but you probably think you can win if my attacks are ineffective against you." Continuing his dialogue with the guy with whom they got into a fight, Han Sando added, "But you know, boy, you have to realize that the whole world will not dance to your tune." Immediately after he said that, the man activated his skill and disappeared from Kim Tae Hyun's sight, after which he was surprised to think that he was being secretive. Standing in a fighting stance and preparing to fight an opponent who hid his presence and became invisible, the boy added in his head that he was invisible. The next moment, continuing his thoughts, the guy mentally added, "However, he must know that this will not change the fact that before he could complete his thought, he suddenly felt a thirst for blood and shouted out an attack." Abruptly looking back to the place where his opponent was probably located, Kim Tae Hyun launched an air attack and added it was still in vain. After the boy attacked the air, Han Sando appeared behind him and asked with an ominous smile, "Are you still so sure about this?" The next moment, taking advantage of the boy's distraction after he was caught off guard, the thief struck and managed to destroy the stone armor and wound the boy. When he saw that his arm was really injured and blood was seeping out from under his armor, Kim Tae Hyun said in his head that it was blood. At the same moment, Han Sando continued to attack the guy he had gained the upper hand over and exclaimed, "Do you know how many scoundrels I have spat on?" Continuing to strike numerous blows at the guy to destroy his stone armor, the thief added those who are mistaken about being invincible. If your weakness is no secret, you probably feel an irresistible urge to run away with your tail between your legs. Continuing to deliver a barrage of blows to his opponent, who tried to defend himself with blocks of hands covered with stones, Han Sando added, "Better understand this before you lose all your skills." Having dealt the last blow, which still managed to reach the target and wound the guy, the thief confidently exclaimed that they have their drawbacks. At the same moment, after taking a certain amount of damage in the battle against Han Sando, Kim Tae Hyun, trying to catch his breath after the confrontation, mentally said, "I didn't know that stone skin had such a flaw." Starting to think in his head what the problem with this skill was, the guy mentally said, "This skill does not block attacks. A sharp blow can crush a stone." As he continued to think, realizing the shortcomings of his own skill and noticing how it was crumbling, he added more and replaced the broken part with a less durable growth. Having finally realized what his enemy had been doing lately, Kim Tae Hyun mentally said, and this was his goal from the very beginning. Immediately after these thoughts, the guy smiled slyly and said in his head, "But now I'm sure the hand-to-hand still doubles even against B-rank opponents, so my capabilities are far from D-rank." Immediately after he finished his thoughts, Kim Tae Hyun said, "I think we should end the experiment," to which Han Sando exclaimed in surprise. Not understanding why his opponent was so confident, the man again rushed at the guy with the weapon and shouted that he had gone crazy when he was cornered. As he was preparing to deliver the final blow to the guy, he heard the thief, Han Sando, say, "You know why I wanted to meet you?" and he just smiled slyly and said, "What are you talking about?" In response to the attacker's question, he replied using his hunting skill, "I only wanted to take away your skill." Feeling something he had never experienced before, Han Sando mentally said, "What the hell kind of frightening mana was this bastard hiding all along?" However, after a short period of bewilderment, the thief, who had regained confidence in his abilities, used his stealth skill again and, smiling ominously, shouted "Boogeyman." As the thief began to wind circles around Tae Hyun, he shouted ominously and said, "I don't care if you think you can hit me without even seeing the target." In response to his opponent's remarks, Tae Hyun used his hunting skill and said, "Didn't you say that all skills have weaknesses?" Immediately after his words, the guy said, immersed in his own thoughts, "I realized this after destroying some monsters." Continuing to recall his past forays to deal with the monsters that had left the gates, he added among those monsters countless who had escaped from me. The next moment, remembering what fate befell all the enemies he had used his hunting skill on, the boy added to his head that at the very end of the hunt, he would eat them all. Immediately after his remarks, Tae Hyun turned his head in the direction of the tentacles and said, "In short, wherever you are hiding." As soon as the enemy noticed that some unknown bloody tentacles were reaching for him, he heard Tae Hyun's words, which added "wherever you run" and exclaimed in confusion. Continuing to watch his skill do everything for him, Tae Hyun added in an ominous tone, "The hunt will consume you anyway." After some time, having dealt with his opponent, Tae Hyun went to An Hyun, who was completely exhausted after the battle with the monster. Continuing to lie on the ground without even being able to move, the guy angrily thought, "Damn, if it weren't for that damn thief who pierced me." Continuing to ponder over his terrible fate, the boy raised his head from the ground and looked in front of him, thinking, "I am a hero of justice, an invisible warrior. Even I, Anhensu, cannot escape death." He remained in this position while the giant ogre headed toward his motionless victim. As soon as the monster approached An Hyun to finish him off, he suddenly flew into the air and moved to another place. Noticing that the monster had come back to life after the last time he saw it, Tae Hyun, who had saved the hero, asked in surprise what it was and was still lying on the ground. The next moment, while continuing to watch the monster from a safe distance with the rescued boy, Tae Hyun added obviously. Using his hunting skill again, the guy smiled slyly and said, "She looks so comfortable now." After a while, having dealt with the threatening monster, Mr. Tae Hyun and his cousin returned home and knocked on the door, after which his uncle and aunt came running out to meet them. Seeing the frightened expressions on his parents' faces, Hwang Ja-yeon happily exclaimed, "Mom, Dad, I'm home." And Tae Hyun added, "Uncle, you're doing well." The next moment after the boys returned home, their aunt nervously said, "Oh my God, we thought the monsters had gotten you." To which Hwang Ja-yeon laughed and said, "It's okay, right, Hyung?" To which he replied, "Yes, but look at what happened here. The house is destroyed as if a gang of thieves had been there." Feeling some pressure on himself, Hwang Ja-yeon, who had just been reminded of his prank, nervously exclaimed that it wasn't so bad, but I can't say for sure what Tae Hyun said. Sometime after the recent events, Tae Hyun turned on the latest news on his phone, where the anchor reported urgent news. Broadcasting on a large screen behind him the monster that caused this chaos, the presenter added that, by order of the management, from this moment on, the danger of a gate breach has been completely removed. Continuing to report the latest news, the news anchor added that the department has ordered the closure of nearby schools for 1 week due to the possible recurrence of the fault. As Tae Hyun continued to listen to what was being said, he heard that, as information about the survivors emerged, society was gradually calming down, while at the same time, while in the hospital after the experience, one of the members of the management who had first taken the hit said that he had confused C rank for A rank. Meanwhile, in another place, a nurse from the school who was moved in a sleeping state to a safe place, testifying to the police, said anxiously, "When I came to, I was already here." At the same time, caught in the lenses of the cameras, and Hensu tried to brush them off and exclaimed, "Dear citizens, I am not the hero who defeated the giant ogre. The real hero is someone else." As Tae Hyun continued to listen to the news on his smartphone, he heard that since the giant ogre's corpse had not yet been examined and the identity of the thief was still unknown, people were concerned that the preventive measures taken would be insufficient. As soon as the news report was over, Tae Hyun turned off his phone and said, "Fortunately, no one even mentioned me." Immediately after he said that and listened to the emergency news, the guy smiled happily and said, "Well, in that case, what the hell?" Being in front of the cave where the monsters were supposed to be, the guy added, "Let's go to the next level." Before entering the tunnel, Tae Hyun mentally said, "Considering all possible scenarios with my current level, it is difficult to use 3 skills at once. Recklessly using my skills can greatly deplete mana, thereby increasing fatigue, which can be a fatal mistake." After thinking about the bad scenario, the boy added in his head the best way to avoid it. Thinking of the most effective way to achieve his goals and avoid bad outcomes, he mentally recited the potions they had created to restore health and mana. Heading inside the tunnel where he was going to level up, the boy thought. But the potions are quite expensive, and he will have to hunt to earn them. As he continued to overcome the obstacles he encountered on his way through the tunnel, Tae Hyun thought, but he needed to hold a permit. The next moment, Tae Hyun remembered another restriction that existed in this world, and it was that using skills without permission is an illegal activity, after which Tae Hyun mentally said, "So I have only one way out." Once in the place where the spider monsters lived, the guy confidently told me to go only through the unexplored dungeons. Once in the lair of the Spider Sisters, Tae Hyun heard them say to him, "How dare a mortal come here? How dare he find us? Let's immobilize him and eat him." In response to all the suggestions and confused exclamations of the Spider Sisters, Tae Hyun said, "There won't be enough to raise my rank. I'll have to absorb hundreds of them." When the Spider Sisters heard the words of the boy who had fallen into their lair, they angrily exclaimed, "How dare you, you weak, vile human being, not realizing the situation you are in?" The 3 of them began to create their joint attack, gathering together a lump of cobwebs, and the sisters exclaimed, "We're going to eat you alive." After unleashing her spiderweb attack on the boy, one of the sisters laughed ominously and exclaimed, "Booga," and that now you feel the ability to move leaves your body and you become paralyzed. In response to the sisters' questions, Tae Hyun only smiled when he received a system notification that said that due to an unknown force, the resistance had been successfully increased. Immediately after the enemy attack was neutralized, Tae Hyun smiled slyly and said, "As I assumed, you have quite useful skills." A few seconds later, frightened screams came from the Spider Sisters' lair, and then Tae Hyun received a system notification that said, "You have successfully completed spitting and a new paralysis skill has been registered." At the same time, somewhere in the main building of the New South Korea Players Association, a certain gathering of important people was taking place. As soon as all the necessary people gathered at the table, the door was closed and a guard was posted in front of it. Being in front of the people he had invited to his association to discuss certain details, the leader felt a certain tension in front of him as the players looked at each other. Trying to find the right moment to start, the man felt all the tension in the room and thought about the 2 best players in the New South Korean Association. The New South Korea Players Association Deputy Human Resources Manager, Go Tae-yuk, is the man who was watching the meeting between the 2 dignitaries and feeling their intense pressure. Players are the awakened who have official permission to use skills for various purposes, such as exploring the abyss, clearing dungeons, and so on. All of them are divided into groups of different representations, the strongest guilds of the New South Korea 4 big guilds, Fighters Guild Invincible. There is also a guild of creators who call themselves alchemists and mages who call their guild wizards. There is another guild that deals with information gathering and trading, and it is called the Vagabonds. The main registered organization that governs the players and includes 4 major guilds is the New South Korean Players Association. After scrolling through all the information about all the subjects that the other 4 major guilds subjugated, Gotuk thought nervously and right in front of me. Leaning her head on her hand, the vagabond guild master and S-ranked player Yu Ah-yeon spoke to her long-lost leader. In response to the greeting of one of his subjects, the leader of the new South Korea S-ranked Players Association, Chae Jin-wee, replied, "Thank you for coming, even though you are a busy lady." Continuing the conversation with the head of the Vagrant Guild, who is in charge of information, the leader asked if you had found out anything, and Yu Ah-yeon replied that you had found out about the Thieves Guild. The Thieves Guild is a criminal organization that was formed by the most repulsive criminals. Even among criminals, the members of the guild wear gold rings with 3 skulls. After receiving the question from Chae Jin-woo, the girl held out the papers and said, "Here are the recent actions of the thieves and a list of the noticed participants." Handing over the papers with the information received from her subjects, the girl asked, "I'm sure you wouldn't have called me just to hand over the papers in person. So what happened?" In response to the girl's question, the man smiled slyly and said, "Well, you know exactly what it is." Continuing to review the reports received from the Vagrant Guild leader, the man added, "I want to hear your opinion on this," to which she asked what my opinion meant. Hearing Yu Ah-yeon's surprised voice, who did not understand what exactly he was talking about, Chae Jin-wee added, "Ms. Yu Ah-yeon, please tell me when you were tested for what?" And she answered in surprise at the age of 19 when it became possible. Immediately after their answer, finally realizing what the man was getting at, they added in surprise to the leader, "Don't tell me," to which he interrupted her with a sly smile and said, "As you wish." Continuing his thought, the man added, "You think a high school student can defeat a monster, but at the same time, Kim Tae Hyun has already defeated a lot of monsters on his own." After accomplishing everything he wanted, the guy called a well-known guild and said, "Hello, this is one of the big guilds of alchemists. Why am I calling you?" When asked the reason for the call, the guy, sitting on the mountain of corpses of defeated monsters from which he had already collected a lot of resources, the guy added, "I want to buy some potions from you." And after a while, the same week-long weekend period, due to the order to close the school for 1 week because of the gate breach passed. What did Kim Tae Hyun do during these 7 days? First of all, he did physical training to increase his strength and endurance. In addition to physical training, the boy also visited several dungeons and was engaged in their clearing. Sometime later, in one of the 4 large guilds of the Alchemist Guild, one of the workers exclaimed in surprise at so many mana stones. Continuing to be amazed at the volume of gems that were brought to them, the man exclaimed in confusion, "VIP, no. You will become our super VIP, so please shop with us more often." And also Kim Tae Hyun bought a mana stone, a monster core that can be used in the manufacture of potions or equipment. As he continued to sit at school and recall what he had been doing over the past week, the boy looked out the window and added in his mind that there was still a long way to go. While everyone was separated from him and whispering anxiously, Kim Tae Hyun added in his mind, "I still have to go to school." The next moment, one of his classmates, having gathered his courage, exclaimed, "Kim Tae Hyun, I heard rumors that you beat Baekhyuk's henchmen. Have you woken up?" Continuing to ask the boy about the latest rumored events, one of his classmates added that Kim Tae Hyun would be fired for any development of events, after which the classmate asked in surprise what he heard in response to what he really didn't understand. Continuing to tell the reason why he said this while the vigilantes were already heading to the boy's classroom, the classmate was confused by the speech. Arriving at the classroom, all the chairs were scattered and one was placed in front of Kim Tae Hyun's desk, and Lee Chong-jae arrived with his henchmen and took a seat in front of the boy, at which time a classmate added Lee Chong-jae would not leave this situation unresolved. Arriving at the guy who had rumored to have beaten his henchman, an S-ranked awakened named Lee Chong-jae said, "Long time no see, friend." Lee Chong-jae is a third-generation Taesan Group Boots conglomerate, sponsoring Taesan High School leader of Taesan High School bullies. When the boy sat down in front of him and tried to start a conversation, Kim Tae Hyun immediately recalled all the times he had been bullied by Baeksu and others. They were partly to blame for all these abuses, but behind all their actions was a more influential person who gave the orders for the abuses and covered them up. Lee Chang-jae was also the main villain who ordered Bae Hai-soo to abuse Kim Tae Hyun, only because he had not yet been able to awaken. After hearing me address him, the guy was surprised to ask what you had just said to be friends with you. Immediately after his question, the guy, unable to stand such arrogant treatment of himself after he had already gained the strength to resist him, Kim Tae Hyun menacingly added, "I'm going to take one for the team, you know." Hearing the tone with which his leader had just been addressed, one of Lee Chang-ji's henchmen pointed a finger at the guy and shouted, "You bastard! Do you even know what you're saying?" The next moment, the same fighter for justice was slapped in the face by his own leader, who was angry at the behavior of his henchman. As soon as his subject calmed down and fell back with a broken nose, the leader of the Tessin group got up from his seat and looked at his henchman and said, "You don't see that we are talking." Immediately after pacifying his subject, Lee Chang-jae began to radiate his mana from his body to appear more formidable, adding, "I know you're in a good mood after defeating Ba Hek-soo." The next moment, demonstrating his superiority over Kim Tae Hyun in terms of sheer strength, the guy added menacingly, "Shouldn't you be more careful about choosing your opponent?" At the same moment, Kim Tae Hyun continued to sit in his seat and said in astonishment in his mind, "Wow, this magic of an S-rank awakened is really amazing." Continuing to threaten the guy sitting in front of him, the son of the leader of the Tessin group added, "Better change your mind while I'm good," to which Kim Tae Hyun mentally replied, "But if you don't know, you don't have to." Preparing to use his predator skill at the first opportunity, the guy added in his head, "I wonder what will happen if you face a hunt." The next moment, an ice-cold girl intervened in the men's showdown, trying to stop the conflict and telling Lee Chang-jae to stop. Hearing the voice of a third party who dared to intervene in their argument, Kim Tae Hyun was surprised to think that Im Ah-yoon had added that Kim Tae Hyun, you should stop too. Im Ah-yoon class, president young lady, from a wealthy family half-sister Yu Ah-yeon, awakened S rank, novice model candidate for first place next semester, noble debt future SS rank player. As he continues to run through the many names others call her, Kim Tae Hyun has added countless nicknames in his head and will receive even more in the future. And all this would have been fine, but this girl had one pronounced problem, and it was that this person was stubborn as hell. Having locked eyes with Lee Chang-jae to stop the argument between the boys, the girl began to drill him with her eyes, and at that time, Kim Tae Hyun added in his head that she would not just back down. Trying to defuse the situation, when Im Yuan joined their conflict, the guy asked what he meant by stop. "They might misunderstand us. I'm just talking to my friend." In response to the boy's words, the girl replied incredulously, "A friend means you hit your friends in the face." Hearing some remark from the girl who had just mentioned something unpleasant for him, Lee Chang-jae said to Im Ah-young, "Watch what you say." In response to the guy's remark, she replied, "I'll have to use force if you don't leave, so stop it and get out of here." At the same time, being at the forefront of the conflict between the two high-ranking students, Kim Tae Hyun thought they should both calm down, otherwise nothing would remain of the class. The next moment, accepting his defeat or trying to pass it off as the truth, the guy waved his hand and headed for the exit saying, "Okay, then let's finish. I don't need to fight you." Immediately after his words, the guy suddenly turned and prepared to attack the girl, exclaiming, "Did she really think I would say that?" However, their conflict was interrupted by a radio announcement with a ringing sound, after which a voice said the notification department in the main hall had organized a special lecture with the Players Association. Continuing to report on the meeting, the voice on the radio told all students to immediately report to the main hall and repeat the new one. Continuing to emphasize the meeting, the voice from the radio spoke again in the main hall. Hearing this, Lee Chang-jae asked in surprise what the Players Association was. Immediately after hearing this, the boy instantly calmed down and headed for the exit, saying goodbye. "I'll tell you that you are just a lucky man." Once everything was finally settled, Im Ah-yoon asked, turning her head to the side to the guy she had stood up for, Kim Tae Hyun, "Are you okay?" The next moment, When her head had almost completed its rotation, she added, "I'm fine. I don't need a thank you." But before she could finish, she noticed that he was no longer in his seat. At that very moment, Tae Hyun was already leaving the classroom and said to the girl on the way out, "Why did you freeze there? You didn't hear the announcement of the meeting." After telling the girl that he was going to the main hall, Tae Hyun went on, leaving the confused girl alone in the classroom, and added, "Well, then I'll go first, yes." Surprised by what had just happened right before her eyes, the girl said in her head that Tae Hyun had always been like this. After a while, when the students gathered in the main hall, they heard whispers of a special lecture from the Players Association about what it would be like to have a gate break. The next moment, a man appeared on stage and spoke into the microphone. "So, greetings. My name is Go-tuk. I'm the Deputy HR Manager from the Players Association." Continuing his special lecture, the man added, "I came today for two reasons. The first is to apologize for the lack of timely response from the players during the fault, and to give a safety briefing." After giving the first important reason why he decided to visit this school, Go-tuk added a second reason. With a firm grip on the microphone in his hand, he smiled slyly and added to the information about the selection of players who will be the future of the new South Korean Players Association. At the same time, while in the main hall of the guest lecture, Lee Chang-jae was biting his lips and said, "Damn Tae Hyun, that bastard." At the same time, in another place in the same hall, Ah-yoon thought in her head, Tae Hyun will need to learn a little more about him. At the same time, when they heard the announcement from the man who came to give the lecture, the students began to talk in surprise about the selection of players and how it applies to us. If the minimum age is not 19, then we will definitely miss out this year. Hearing the confused disciples talking, Go-tuk added, "You may think so, but we are here because this applies to you as well." Continuing to report on the reason for their arrival at this school, the man added due to the recent gate breach, the increase in the number of monsters and dungeons. Leaning closer to the microphone, the man added, "The Players Association has come to the conclusion that we do not have enough people, and that is why, starting with these qualifiers, we are opening the doors to high school students." Upon hearing the announcement from the man, one of the students present exclaimed in surprise that the high school students, even us, were invited. Trying to answer the boy's question, Go-tuk said that each school selects candidates based on their skills, personal grades, and behavior. Hearing this, Tae Hyun thought to himself, "He's clearly lying." Continuing to watch the speech of the man from the Players Association, he added his head to these qualifiers and will indeed allow high school students, but the selection of candidates has already begun. Continuing to focus his attention on the man speaking from the podium, Tae Hyun added in his head using the tuk skill. Knowing a lot about the skills of this person, Tae Hyun said in his head that his skills are the eye of the beholder. The observer's eye is able to quantify the general capabilities of the object, and if you concentrate, you can see the status window of the selected target. After analyzing the students present who could be potential players, the man spoke confidently without any doubts. The next moment, as he continued his thoughts, he mentally added, "The numbers here are much better than elsewhere, and they will make excellent players." The next moment, noticing a few students who clearly stood out from the rest, Go-tuk added in his mind, "But who were the most shocking?" Looking at the numbers above Lee Chang-jae and Ah-yoon, the man added these two in his head. Continuing to analyze the students who could potentially become great players, the man added in his head, "The vagrant sent me a list of possible candidates with the words, 'Here you go, but it's only because the leader asked.'" And then he mentally added, "I can't believe there are so many awakened ones here." Continuing to smile slyly as he saw many promising students at this school, Go-tuk added in his mind, "I need to write letters of recommendation as soon as I return." The next moment, the hand of one of the students appeared from the crowd of students, after which Lee Chang-ji suddenly exclaimed, "Mr. Player, may I ask you something?" Continuing his speech, the guy added, "You said you would inform us about the selection of players, but are some of the people here suitable for this?" To which he asked what you meant. In response to the man's question, the student added, "I say that the qualifiers should be held among those who can become players, that is, among the awakened, in other words." The next moment, turning his attention to Kim Tae Hyun and directing the attention of a large number of students to him, he added, "I think there is no point in listening to this lecture for the unawakened." Immediately after his words, Lee Changjae added that strength is not all that makes a Judas player an awakening rank. The ability to cope with various situations or considerable knowledge of the abyss. Listing the main qualities of those people who are considered to be players, he added that to be a player, you have to have all possible characteristics in different areas. Continuing his attempts to mock Kim Tae Hyun, Lee Changjae added, "But in the end, all of this has value only for the awakened." Turning his head again to Kim Tae Hyun, after which a large number of his henchmen laughed, the guy added, "For the unawakened, you're just pouring salt on the wound, aren't you?" Hearing the boy's words, Kim Tae Hyun turned his head to him and said, "Changjae, you're going to go so far as to check if I'm really awake." At the same time, while continuing to provoke the boy, Lee Changjae said in his head, "Come on, if you are really awakened, then show it." The next moment, unable to stand the mockery, Ima Young tried to intervene in their argument again and shouted out to Lee Changjae. Before she could say anything against the boy, she thought of the expected reaction, where Kim Tae Hyun said in a choked voice, "What are you doing? Didn't I ask you to do that?" Realizing that it was better for her not to interfere in this matter, the girl instantly tilted her head forward and thought, "I don't care. I don't care either." As soon as the girl quieted down, Lee Changjae added, "That's why I hope you'll let them go as soon as possible." To which Gotuk replied, "I understand your position, but students have the right to choose whether or not to stay in class." Hearing the words of the guest who came to give the lecture, Lee Changjae smiled again and said, "Kim Tae Hyun, this affects you in a certain way. You cannot be elected if you have not yet awakened." Continuing to provoke the guy to finally demonstrate his strength as an awakened guy, he added, "Or you don't care about the qualifiers." In response to his not-so-best friend's insults, Kim Tae Hyun just smiled slyly and thought, "He's trying to get me out of it, and without proof that I've awakened, I won't even be able to sign up for the qualifiers." Immediately after his thoughts, he looked up and noticed the same eye of the beholder above him, and added in his mind, "I don't need to prove anything to get a letter of recommendation." After these disputes arose between his students, Gotuk singled out 3 students to focus his attention on. Starting to analyze everything about one of them, the man thought Lee Changjae is an awakened S rank, but he is bullying the others, which is quite sad. The next moment, turning his gaze to the dark horse of the meeting, Gotuk added in his head, "And that was Kim Tae Hyun. According to the student council, he is unawakened and has no rank." Deciding to analyze the guy's characteristics, he added in his head a miserable existence among the awakened, and then noticed that when using his skill, a system notification appeared that said the information was unavailable. The next moment, after deciding to act, Kim Tae Hyun suddenly said, "You were right. It was too rash." After deciding to leave the lecture, Kim Tae Hyun added that if a miserable unawakened person attends such a lecture, it will hurt his pride. As soon as he attracted enough attention, the boy demonstrated an obscene gesture to his nemesis and said, "Then I'm leaving." Continuing to demonstrate vivid malevolence, the guy added, "And you stay here and listen to this unrealistic lecture?" Lee Changjae exclaimed, "This bastard." At the same time, plunged into a certain shock at what he saw, the man from the control room mentally said that my observer's eye did not work. Starting to think of quite strong people on whom he had calmly used his skill, Gotuk added in his head, "But even with the leader." The next moment, remembering the leader of the vagrant guild, he added in his mind, "And you, Ayon, this had never happened." After finishing his recollections and focusing his attention back on the boy in front of him, the man wondered why. Sinking deeper and deeper into that feeling of shock, the man wondered in his head what made him different. Continuing to make attempts to analyze the guy's characteristics, he failed again and again, receiving a system notification that the information was unavailable. Before leaving the main hall, Kim Tae Hyun looked back at the man and just smiled, at which time Go Tae-uk again received a notification that the information was unavailable. After a while, sitting in the library looking for the information he needed, Kim Tae Hyun said he would probably spend the rest of his life searching for clues about the king. Closing the book after he heard that someone had come to see him, the guy looked at the guests and added disappointedly, "I don't think I'm going to find anything." The next moment, as soon as Kim Tae Hyun finished his speech, one of the henchmen said, "You're looking for Chang Jae, follow us." In response to an order from one of the local gangsters' henchmen, Kim Tae Hyun began to look through another book and said, "What if I refuse?" In response to the boy's question, who continued to go about his business, the man added, "Your aunt runs a restaurant, doesn't she?" When he heard some information that Lee Chang-jae had decided to go too far, Kim Tae Hyun exclaimed that he heard Chang-jae wanted me to give you this. Continuing to provoke the boy and mock him, one of the henchmen said, "Poor orphan, you want to create problems for your aunt when she has already suffered enough." Continuing his confident speech from the position of a strong henchman, he added, not expecting resistance, "But don't worry, we will get you to Chang-jae." In just a few seconds, having dealt with the two henchmen and left the leader conscious, Kim Tae Hyun lifted him up in front of him, holding him by the neck. Demonstrating direct proof that it was better not to joke with him, the guy said in a menacing tone, "Don't make me repeat myself twice." Trying to get the information he needed, Kim Tae Hyun angrily shouted out where that rascal Lee Chang-jae was. After a while, having arrived at the meeting place, the guy's bodyguard said in confusion that it was surprising, and then his master asked what he thought. In response to his master's question, A-ranked player Sol Hundo and bodyguard Lee Chang-jae replied, "After this guy came in here, I activated several skills that reveal the status of the aliens." Continuing to look at the guy standing right in front of them, he added confusedly, "But they didn't work on him with such incredible resistance. Maybe he was a rank," to which Lee Chang-jae laughed and added, "Just as I thought, you're awake." Immediately after his ominous laugh, the guy smiled slyly and said, "Well, then maybe we'll just talk to our friend." The next moment, heading to meet Kim Tae Hyun, the guy said, "My words may seem rude, but I have no intention of harming you. In fact, I wanted to test you." Reaching out to the guy he had recently harassed, Lee Chang-jae added, "I'm going to start my own guild after I take over the Tessin group, but even a genius like me can't do everything alone." Continuing to exert some pressure to persuade Kim Tae Hyun to work for him, he added, "I hope you understand what I mean by that." Continuing to express his insidious thoughts, Lee Chang-jae added that talented people are not someone like that lazy Baekhyuk, but real talents. Immediately after his words, he pointed a finger in the direction of Kim Tae Hyun, who was standing right in front of him, and added arrogantly, "Just like the current Kim Tae Hyun." Again, the guy extended his hand to him as a sign of a deal, smiled ominously and exclaimed, "So, Kim Tae Hyun, forget your old grievances and work for me." Starting to promise mountains of gold again to persuade the boy, Lee Chang-jae exclaimed, "Wealth and glory await you. I will pull your family out of the shit they are living in now." In response to all the suggestions of his opponent, who made his demands in order to make him work for him, Kim Tae Hyun said, "You talk too much." As he began to cover his entire skin with stone armor, the guy added that to believe you is wealth and glory. As soon as his body was covered with stone skin to confront his opponent, Kim Tae Hyun added menacingly to Lee Chang-jae and said, "Fuck you." In response to the boy's refusal, Lee Chang-jae activated his fire skill and said in an ominous tone, "Oh, I almost forgot that the dog needs to be tamed." At that very moment, following his master's instructions, his subject, Sol Hundo, used his skill to create a room, a binding skill that covers the space with magic so that it is impossible to feel the mana coming from the outside. After completing the creation of the protective barrier, Sol Hundo rubbed his hands together and said, "Now no one from the outside will be able to find out about the young master's fight." Turning his gaze to the created room, where the battle has already begun to take place, the man added, "We can enjoy the show." In a close combat, Kim Tae Hyun delivered a direct blow and clashed fists with his opponent, resulting in an explosion. However, the C-rank stone skin was somewhat weaker than the S-rank fireheart, so Chang-jae had a slight advantage on the battlefield and was already preparing to kick. As a result of the collision, Tae Hyun was in a losing position and was again kicked by his opponent. At the same time, Lee Chang-jae, continuing to push Tae Hyun, exclaimed arrogantly that he had finally realized his place. Immediately after these words, a large number of explosions sounded in the closed room, which were caused by the next clashes between the guys in the battle. Continuing to just stand there and watch what was happening inside the room, the bodyguard mentally said, "This guy Tae Hyun, I feel sorry for him." As he continued to watch the battle between the two boys, Sol-hundo added in his head that he might have a high-level A-rank body strengthening skill and might have a hard time finding a worthy opponent with the kind of fighting skills and mental strength that an ordinary student would not have. Continuing his thoughts on how unlucky the guy was this time, Sol-hundo smiled and added, "But today is his opponent." Noticing the same direct blow of his master that had just hit the target, the bodyguard who was watching the battle added an embodiment of greatness. At the end of the mention of his master's strength, the man put his hands in his pockets and confidently said, "Tae Hyun, you have no chance of winning. You better realize your place and surrender." Immediately after his words, the man could see something strange that shocked him. At first, Lee Chang-jae continued to push and struck. But the next moment, Tae Hyun struck back, forcing him to defend himself and move to a defensive position. As soon as the guys switched roles, Tae Hyun continued his onslaught and delivered the final blow and knocked his opponent to the ground. Seeing what had just happened, Sol-hundo exclaimed in confusion that the impossibly young gentleman had been defeated in close combat. Continuing to look at his ward, who was lying on the ground after the defeat, moaning heavily, the man added in his head, "But how so?" The next moment, when Lee Chang-jae regained consciousness after being defeated, he angrily exclaimed, "Damn you, you bastard Tae Hyun! What did you do to me? My body can't move." Hearing what his young master had just said, the bodyguard, who was standing farther away from the scene of the collision, said in a confused voice that he was immobilized. Immediately after these thoughts, the man turned his gaze to Tae Hyun and confusedly added in his head, "Amplification is not his only skill. Then who is he?" As he continued to watch his opponent's opponent, Sol-hundo heard him say, "Well, it finally worked," and then thought what the hell he had done. Thanks to the hunting skill, Tae Hyun was able to gain 3 different skills, the first of which is stone skin, the second is stealth, and the third is paralysis from the Spider Sisters. From the very beginning, Tae Hyun didn't use all 3 skills, but it's quite difficult for C-rank paralysis to break through S-rank resistance. And the skill of stealth among a pile of flames is of no use as it dissipates at the first contact with it. And that is why paralysis was the only one of the 3 skills, except that it is not easy to use. Having drawn up a plan of action to defeat Lee Chang-jae, the boy came up with nothing more effective than to paralyze him in close combat. Skills that affect status work more effectively in melee combat than from a long distance, and the same goes for damage sustained from endless paralyzing blows, even with S-rank resistance. Continuing to pierce the defense of his opponent over and over again, failing each time, at some point the defense finally broke down and the opponent fell under the influence of the skill. Thus, thanks to his efforts and the continuation of the battle, Tae Hyun was able to defeat his opponent in close combat. At the same time, while continuing to simply watch from the sidelines everything that was happening on the battlefield, Sol-hundo nervously thought, the genius in the one-on-one battle had surpassed the level of the young master. As he continued to watch his young master and boyfriend fight, Sol-hundo was surprised to see this fight in his mind. At the same time, while still lying on the ground, Lee Chang-jae laughed hard and said, "Well, Tae Hyun, I recognize you." Taking out a crystal to restore energy from his pocket, he added, "I think I underestimated you too much, because I just can't lose to a loser like you." He began to squeeze the crystal in his hands to regain his strength and added tiredly, "And that is why from that very moment on, The next moment, Lee Changji crushed the crystal in his hands and his body was enveloped in magical energy that began to restore his body from its injuries. Also, after using it, the guy created a giant fire golem behind him that obeyed his orders. As soon as all his mana was restored, even with an excess, Lee Changji put his hand to his face and smiled ominously. "I will fight to the fullest." Immediately after his words, the guy performed his Purga attack, which was exactly duplicated by the fire spirit he created, forcing Tae Hyun to step back. After several unsuccessful attempts, Lee Changji managed to reach his opponent and strike him. As soon as Tae Hyun was on the ground, Seol Hundo noticed that the situation was escalating and jumped the fence and was about to intervene in the fight, thinking that this was a true accounting of the skill of the young S-rank Flame Heart Master. Continuing to walk toward his young master to stop him, he nervously added, "It is usually difficult to fully release the power of a young master because he is S-rank." The next moment, remembering the way the young man had been able to use his body skill, the guard mentally added the one he had just used. Recalling the magic item that Lee Changji used to achieve this effect, he added a mana-enhancing stone, which is obtained by purifying the mana stone, which is the core of monsters. Continuing to observe what was happening on the battlefield, the man said anxiously in his head. He temporarily increased his mana. Looking at Lee Changji, who was controlling his fire spirit that Seol Hundo had summoned, he added in his mind that now the young master could fully unleash his S-rank power using this stone. Continuing his reflections and observations, the man, heading to his ward, thought, however, "The problem is this." Determined to at least warn his master, the man exclaimed, "Young sir, you must stop now or you are going to kill him." Continuing to express his concern about the situation, he added, "You can't handle this kind of power yet. Your blood will literally boil over because of the excessive amount of mana." Hearing the shouts of his subject, Lee Changji, not wanting to listen to anyone's remarks, fired a fireball at him. Having warned his bodyguard about using force, the guy angrily shouted, "Shut up! What kind of a guard dares to tell me what to do?" The next moment, turning his gaze to Tae Hyun, he added in a menacing tone, "This piece of shit has humiliated me, and you're suggesting that I let him off the hook." Rushing back into the fray and beginning to attack his opponent, Lee Changji angrily shouted, "Shut your mouth!" Continuing to strike after strike with the help of his fiery spirit, the guy smiling ominously added, "Die, die, Tae Hyun." At the same time, while continuing to head to the battlefield to save the boy, Seol Hundo thought things were bad. It seems he had lost control of himself and how he was going to deal with the consequences. As the guard approached the smoking crater, he shouted anxiously to Tae Hyun, "You're alive! Give up and run away from here!" Stretching his hand into the crater where the boy was, Seol Hundo added, "I'll try to detain the young man, and you can do that in the meantime." In response to the man's proposal, Tae Hyun only slapped him in the face instead of taking the outstretched hand of help. Immediately after he got to his feet and walked forward to his enemy, he asked him what was the point of running away. "What are you talking about when you started this fight? Using fatigue potions, stamina potions, and mana potions in the process, the guy added 0 to the marketplace. I admit that S-rank is very different from now on." Having finally activated his hunting skill, Tae Hyun prepared for a serious fight and said, "I won't hold back either." At the same time, somewhere in the main building of the Players Association, Go-Tuk arrived at the end of his lecture to report to the management. After receiving the report from his subject, Che Jin-woo exclaimed in confusion that it was possible that 1,900 and 2,300 was possible. In response to his supervisor's question, Go-Tuk answered that Lee Changji has 1,900 and Lim Ah-hen has 2,300. There is no doubt that these two are S-ranked awakened. Immediately after Go-Tuk's words, one of the subjects looking at the report exclaimed in surprise, "Even though they have S-rank, but I can't believe that they have already 1,900 without training," to which another added that this is enough to become a ranked player, in which case he can be on par with a Japanese saint. When he heard the question from his colleague, Go-Tuk bowed his head down and said in his head that wholly yes. Starting to recall the person in question, the man added in his head one of the main players in Japan is a monster with a value exceeding 2,500 after being tested at the age of 18. Continuing his thoughts, the man added anxiously in his head that even this monster's value barely exceeded 2,500. Immediately after his thoughts, Gotuk remembered Tae Hyun, whose value of 5,096 units he saw at the very end, and was frightened to think, "What the fuck are you talking about, that guy?" Trying to somehow calm his nerves after remembering that student, the man added in his head that it just seemed like a miscalculation or something. Going in search of the guy who was bothering him, the man confidently said in his head, "I have to check it out for myself." At the same time, somewhere in a school on the battlefield, watching what was happening before his eyes, Sul Hundo exclaimed in confusion that this simply could not be. Kneeling in amazement, the man raised his head up and asked how this was possible. At the same time, trying to somehow resist the incredible force that was shackling his body, Lee Changjae exclaimed in confusion as to what was happening. Feeling that he simply had no control over his body and could not do anything at the moment, the guy added in confusion, "How this bastard was able to suppress my power. I am a descendant of the Tae Hyun group." Continuing to be irritated by the situation at the moment, the guy shouted out, "I'm a fucking S rank!" Continuing to express his dissatisfaction with being in a losing situation, Lee Changjae again exclaimed, "I'm fucking Lee Changjae." In response to his opponent's furious shouts that he was going to steal his skills, Tae Hyun said, "I don't care whose descendant you are, what rank you have, what does it matter at all?" Continuing to smile ominously right into the face of his opponent, the guy added, "If you are in a battle." Immediately after his words, the guy used his hunting skill and launched the hunter's tentacles at Lee Changjae. A few seconds after the final collision, a powerful explosion occurred, destroying at least the gymnasium of the building. As a result of the explosion, Lee Changjae lost his life and was unconscious lying on the floor of the gym. After winning this fight, Tae Hyun approached the body of his opponent's guard and said, "I was surprised." Starting to recall what had recently happened during their fight, Tae Hyun mentally said a ranked player, Seo Hyun Do, did not expect to pull Lee Changjae away right in the middle of the hunt. Continuing his reflections, standing on his feet in front of the man who bowed his head in front of him, the boy added, "Well, now it doesn't matter if I managed to get the skill after what I heard and what you are going to do now." Continuing his speech, the bodyguard added, "Young gentleman descendant of Tasan, after this battle, there will be consequences," to which he replied disgruntledly, "Who would speak for you? It was I who attacked first, no conscience at all." Immediately after his words, Tae Hyun smiled slyly and said, "By the way, do I look like the kind of person who would respond to such threats?" The next moment, raising his head up to assess the scale of the consequences, he added, "Don't even bother killing him, I'm not going to," which was the response he got. When he heard the question from Lee Changjae's subject, the guy added, "In exchange for his life, I will tell you the price," to which the latter confusedly exclaimed, "The price of his life." Continuing to reflect on the compensation for Lee Changjae's life, Tae Hyun ignored the man and said, "Let's see, since he is essentially a descendant of the Tae Sang group." Putting a hand to his chin and smiling slyly, Tae Hyun looked at Seo Hyun and said, "You owe me at least 1,000,000,000, I agree." At the same time, school children who had already gathered near the site of the explosion met a nurse who was trying to avoid panic and chaos. Also in the crowd of confused people, Ima-yoon listened to everyone shouting back that there was an attack by a thief or monster, and she thought anxiously that it was not. Realizing what could be the cause of this incident, the girl was frightened and added in her head this magic and a strong flame of doubt whether it was Lee Changjae's power. Continuing her thoughts, she mentally added, "But who was fighting him then?" And then suddenly imagined in her mind a fight between Lee Changjae, who was waving his arms and shouting ominously, "Bugaga Tae Hyun, you're a loser. You were just a loser." And Tae Hyun, who was scared and shouting, "Oh, save me," and then thought, "Not that." In Ima-yoon's mind, this was the relationship between the two. and then ignoring the teacher's words that the students should stay here anyway, she headed for the scene. Noticing that someone had just passed by her, the teacher shrieked in confusion, then looked back and saw who it was who had gone to the scene and exclaimed in confusion. Approaching the entrance and starting to kick the front door to get inside, she thought I was wrong. I shouldn't have let them stay in the gym alone. Continuing to break through the flames, smoke and rubble of the building's ruins, the girl added anxiously in her head, "It's all my fault, Kim Tae Hyun." On her way to the place where the explosion occurred to help the wounded guy, she added in her head, "I pray you survive." However, everything did not happen as expected. When she arrived at the scene, she saw Lee Chang-jae lying unconscious on the floor. And not far from this motionless body stood Kim Tae Hyun, who did not seem to be affected by the situation, even by external signs. While the girl began to spontaneously throw around confused questions, Kim Tae Hyun said, "Oh, you're just in time. I just thought I needed a witness. That is, I need help with carrying the body. Take him to the first aid station, or better yet, to the hospital." Hearing the request from her classmate, the girls went to Lee Chang-jae and confusedly exclaimed to Kim Tae Hyun what was going on here, to which he awkwardly replied, "How did he manage to faint? Maybe he fell down the stairs." Hearing the boy's excuse, Im-a-yoon turned her gaze to the victim and mentally said from the stairs, after which Kim Tae Hyun added, "In general, he has nothing to do with me, so I'll leave him to you, and don't tell him that you saw me well." Immediately after his words, heading for the entrance, the guy said, "Well then, I'm leaving." And the girl turned her head in his direction and exclaimed, "Wait, Kim Tae Hyun, explain everything properly." As soon as she said this, she saw that the guy was no longer in the gym. He had simply vanished into thin air, and she exclaimed in confusion. Trying to realize what had happened, the girl shouted his name again, but the guy was already on the edge of the city, away from the scene of the incident, and then breathed a sigh of relief. Continuing to look in the direction where the fight with his opponent took place, Kim Tae Hyun said, "Im-a-yoon will somehow cope with Lee Chang-jae, and the Taesong group will also fulfill my conditions, so I think that's all." Immediately after opening his status window, he decided to review the description of the skill he had just learned, and said anyway. While reviewing his characteristics, the guy accidentally noticed the new characteristic he had received, and was surprised to say, "Charm, isn't it, about the appearance of celebrities?" Realizing that he had taken away his opponent's hunting skill, Kim Tae Hyun said, "Don't tell me that hunting took away Lee Chang-jae's hunting skill. It's annoying." The next moment, moving his gaze to the list of skills he had, the guy mentally added, "I also got this heart of flame and the heart of a monarch." Looking at the characteristics of the skill he had gained during the hunt, he was surprised to see that it increased the characteristics of the group members, so Lee Chang-jae had such a skill. Kim Tae Hyun smiled slyly and spoke in a very nice way, pleased with the skill he had acquired. Starting to imagine in his head the owners of the skills he has, the guy mentally added skills that affect the entire group, rare regardless of rank, and if I am the one who uses several skills, I activate the monarch's heart, which allows me to combine any skill. I will become stronger. Rejoicing at what he had received after the fight with Lee Chang-jae, Kim Tae Hyun said, "It's just so damn beautiful." But before he could get far, a bunch of management vehicles caught up with him and surrounded him from all sides. The next moment, a familiar person came out of the cabin of one of the cars and said, "Finally we found you, Kim Tae Hyun." Continuing to walk confidently toward the boy, accompanied by his bodyguards, Gotuk added, "I have a lot of questions for you." Continuing to walk toward the confused boy, he added, "Let's start with this." And at that time, Kim Tae Hyun wondered how he had gotten here. Looking at the man who was on his way to meet him and asked him a question about what you were doing earlier inside the gym. At the same time, somewhere in the Tasan family's house, a man holding a glass of alcohol in his hand asked, "So what do you think?" Continuing to ask his questions under the barking of dogs, the man added, "My only son and offspring are hospitalized, but that's not enough for him. He also demands 1 billion won for my son's life and to settle this case quietly." After voicing his question, the man continued to sit on his throne, surrounded on both sides by dogs barking menacingly. At the same time, bowing his head down, Tae Hyun said guiltily in a trembling voice, "Please forgive me." Keeping his head down and dripping with sweat, the subject felt his whole body trembling with fear and added, "I have nothing to tell you." After thinking a bit about what he should do in this situation, the manager said, "Fulfill these conditions." And Tae Hyun said, "Stop right there," and he heard a boogaloo in response. Immediately after his words, the man snapped his fingers and added that the price we would pay would be followed by a corresponding reward. Hearing a signal from his superior, a couple of people came out of the next room and saw them, and Tae Hyun exclaimed in confusion. Realizing what was coming next, he exclaimed frightenedly, "He was just a boy. It would be too cruel." In response to his subject's alarmed exclamations, the man said, "Enough! I'm not going to listen to the dog barking." The person who started pulling the strings to take revenge on Tae Hyun was S-ranked player Lee Chang-soo, president of the Taesan group. At the same time, while staying in one place while being caught up by Tae Hyun, he heard himself asked again what you were doing in the gym. Trying to understand the reason for the arrival of the person from the management office at his location, Tae Hyun wondered why Go-tuk was here. The next moment, as he began to go over in his head the two incidents that had happened to him in the same place, he mentally added the gym, whether he was talking about the explosion or the situation during the lecture. Trying to understand why the man had come to him with these questions, he added up in his head what he had heard. Continuing to look at the person in front of him, Tae Hyun thought, given his position as deputy manager, the chance that he himself had come to deal with the explosion was rather low, but maybe he already knew that I had set it off. Continuing to brainstorm, the guy mentally added, "Then all that remains is to check it and then ask the gym about the explosion." Hearing the question from the guy he was interested in, the management manager was surprised to hear that there was an explosion. The next moment, turning his head to the column of smoke that was visible even from here, he said, "You know, that fire is under control. Other people will take care of it." Immediately after these words, he turned his head back to the boy and added, "However, I still haven't received an answer to my question." And then Tae Hyun thought he didn't know the cause of the explosion. Continuing to question the boy about the latest events, Go-tuk added, "What exactly you did in the gym on Tae Hyun," just smiled slyly and thought that meant something. Deciding to take advantage of the situation, Tae Hyun confidently looked at the member of the management and asked, "Don't you already know?" In response to the guy's question, Go-tuk asked him what he was talking about, and he replied, "I think you came to give me an invitation to the qualifiers for the games." After laughing nervously at the boy's question, Go-tuk asked the selectors why they were interested in him. In response to the man's question, who continued to pretend not to know, Tae Hyun replied, "Well, if you need a reason." Having demonstrated his true strength, which now amounted to 5,214 points, Tae Hyun said then, "Isn't that enough?" At the same moment, Go-tuk, who was in a state of shock when he saw that incredibly high figure again, thought it simply could not be. Continuing to marvel at what he now saw in front of him, the man added in his head, confused, he became even stronger. Observing Tae Hyun's current increase, he mentally added that this number was not an accident or a skill error. Continuing to marvel at the overall strength of the guy standing in front of the representative of the department, Tae Hyun added in his head, "Who are you?" Immediately after his thoughts, the man added, "But what happened to your clothes?" To which he replied awkwardly, "Oh, I'm this one." After a while, when Tae Hyun returned home, he met his cousin and told him some of the latest information, to which he heard a surprised exclamation from the selected players. At the entrance to the boys' room, Hwang Jae-yeon was surprised to hear that Hyunam was going to participate in the qualifiers, and he calmly continued his training and replied, "Yeah, in a month." Continuing to be amazed at his cousin's achievements, Hwang Jae-yeon began to bow to him and said what one would expect from the king, God General Emperor Generalissimus of the great Tae Hyun Yim, to which he asked in surprise, "Are you mocking me?" After the dialogue with his cousin, Kim Tae Hyun returned his head to the dumbbell and mentally said, Taesan Group took good care of the explosion representatives, so Go Tae-uk didn't suspect anything. If the qualifiers are in a month, then I have to concentrate on training. As he continued to strengthen his body, the guy thought to himself, I think there shouldn't be any more problems. But before he could finish the thought, he heard his phone suddenly ring. At the same time, a couple of thieves were already near his house, hired by Lee Chang-soo to get even with the guy who did this to his son. While one of the thieves continued to observe, the other one, neutralizing the guard, said, I wonder why a player from the association is guarding the house of a high school student. Holding the man who was supposed to be responsible for Kim Tae Hyun's safety by the throat, one of the pair of thieves listened to him moan heavily, adding to the annoyance. In response to his friend's words, one of the thieves who arrived at the boy's house huffed and said that he might be one of the candidates for the qualifiers. Immediately after his words, a rank thief from a duo of hired killers, Black and White brothers, the older brother Black with stealth skills, those body enhancements, said in the end they are really worried about their future. Standing up to his full height and spreading his arms in front of him, the man added that they can call him whatever they want, because without combat experience they are useless. Immediately after his words, the elder brother, nicknamed Black, smiled ominously and exclaimed joyfully, Then let's show who the real awakened ones are, my younger brother. When the man did not receive an answer to his words, he looked back and saw that his accomplice was already being roped and shouted out to his brother in confusion. Angry that they had been attacked during the mission and that his younger brother had already been beaten, the older man rushed into the fight and shouted, Who the hell are you? In response to a question from a black man who was coming at him with a weapon, Kim Tae Hyun let go of a white man who had already lost consciousness and asked who I was. After receiving a blow from the enemy, which he managed to avoid by inflicting a preemptive strike, Kim Tae Hyun kneed him in the face. After the enemy lost concentration and calmed down a bit, the guy added, I'm the one you called an inexperienced little shit. And now let's go back a few hours to when Sol Hundo shouted out the price that Kim Tae Hyun had just given him in exchange for Lee Chang-jae's life, and he was confused. Continuing to kneel in front of the guy who set the conditions, the man added frightenedly, I can't make such decisions on my own, except for keeping quiet about what happened. When Kim Tae Hyun heard the man's remark, he waved his hand and said, Do you really think I might not know that? Continuing a business conversation with Sol Hundo, the guy added, I'm not an asshole who dumps all the work on minions just to influence a positive decision. Immediately afterwards, Kim Tae Hyun added a certain degree of warning so that he would not even think of being deceived. But he also added a warning in case of betrayal. Holding out his hand to the man, Kim Tae Hyun said, Perhaps we can make a deal. An oath of the awakened contract created by the awakened with the help of magic. Failure to fulfill the duties will result in a permanent random fine. After being offered the contract, the guy confidently added the first one along with the payment of 1 billion won in compensation. Continuing to put forward his conditions, the boy added that you would completely hide the cause of the explosion in the gym, and after a while, the news reported that the cause of the fire in the gym of Taesan School was a gas explosion, and fortunately, no one was injured. As he continued to recall his conversation with Sol Hundo, he said, and then, at that very moment, his phone rang. Picking up the phone, he heard the voice of a man who said to him, Hello, it's me, Sol Hundo. Somewhere in the thickets of the forest, a man said, I want to warn you about the killers of the awakened one bound by the oath. Kim Tae Hyun's second condition was that he inform him in advance of all intentions to take revenge. Having finished his thoughts, the guy continued to fight for his life with one of the two hired killers who came for his soul. Continuing the fight, he blocked the enemy's attacks and, waiting for the right opportunity, attacked back. At one point, when their battle reached a certain point, one of the hired killers, the older black brother, found himself in Kim Tae Hyun's blind spot. However, he only thought so at the moment of his attack. The man heard the Black and White brothers, I heard, that you specialize in deadly attacks using stealth. Behind the enemy's back, who did not understand what had just happened, Tae Hyun put his foot on his head and said, "Thank you for that." Looking at the enemy with a disdainful look, the guy added in an ominous tone, "It means that you are complete ineptitude in everything else." At the same time, the leader of the Vagrant Guild was returning from a meeting in one of the official cars to her guild. Sitting in the passenger seat, a girl talking on the phone said, "I heard you have chosen a candidate for the qualifiers, which will be a gathering of the most potential candidates from all over the country." Switching the sound from the phone to the headphones, the girl added, "And who are you so eager to meet? The leader, let me guess, S-rank Shin Yongbok from Busan." In response to Yuan Chi's question, Jinwoo, standing by the window, replied, "No, of course he's famous, but he's not the one I want to see." The man smiled happily during the talks with the girl and denied her guess and said, "Your younger sister." Hearing the proposal of who he would like to take as a candidate, Yu Ah-yeon said, "Oh, do you think the family will tolerate anything worse than this?" and was laughed at, followed by the man adding, "I'm just as cruel." As she continued to talk to the leader of the Vagabonds Guild, she heard Chae Jinwee ask who Gin Yongbok was expecting. When the man asked the girl a question, she replied, "Yeah, until we hear something funny," to which he was surprised to hear something funny again. Hearing some surprise in the leader's head, the girl added, ignoring all the S ranks, the deputy manager, Go Tuk, personally contacted one student, to which he asked in surprise if he had really done it. Continuing her conversation with the leader of the Players Guild, the girl added with interest, "Isn't it interesting how good that awakened one is?" Continuing the conversation with her husband, she added that if he had intervened personally, and at that time, 2 hired killers were already unconscious. After the battle with the enemies was over, Tae Hyun tried to activate the skill and failed, after which he looked at his hand and said in surprise, "Now what's wrong?" Continuing to look at his hand, the guy saw a system notification that said that due to lack of physical capabilities, the use of the hunt was impossible until the download was completed. After a while, when the thieves were defeated, members of the administration arrived at the street where Tae Hyun lived to settle the case. While Go Tuk was having a dialogue with the boy, his assistants went to a couple of bandits who dared to attack the boy. Looking at the pair of bandits, one of the assistants said, "Those black and white scoundrels again. They not only dared to contact a member of the Players Association, but also tried to attack a high school student," to which the other replied, "Don't you think the thieves have gotten too wild lately?" At the same time, being behind the assistants of the Players Association, Go Tuk turned his head to the target of the attack and said, Tae Hyun, thanks for telling me. Do you have any idea who might be behind this?" In response to the man's question, the guy looked up, then thoughtfully hummed and looked away, saying, "I'm not sure." After receiving an unclear answer, Go Tae Hyuk said that perhaps the list of participants had been leaked to the network, and that the rest of them should beef up their security. And when Tae Hyun heard this, he thought, "If I involve the Taesong group, I will not only be unable to properly understand everything, but I will also put myself at risk." Immediately after his thoughts, he looked down at his hand and mentally said, "Besides, they're not the biggest problem." When Tae Hyun tried to activate his hunting skill again, he received the same system notification that said that due to lack of physical ability, the use of hunting was not possible until the reboot was completed, after which he thought he was out. After the dialogue with Go Tuk ended, Tae Hyun went home and thought, "I won't be able to use hunting until my physical abilities are sufficient. Lord, what is wrong with this skill?" Continuing to walk home with his head down, the guy began to recall the monsters he had defeated and thought, "Then I just have to increase my characteristics for this." Starting to think about how he could improve his physical characteristics, the guy thought that to fight monsters, to increase his rank, he needs hunting, and I don't have it. And to fight the awakened, I need hunting, which I can't use. Realizing that his traditional methods, which he had been using until recently, were not effective, the guy said, "Damn it, I guess I just don't have any other option." After a while, having collected his thoughts and come up with a logical solution to the problem he faced, the guy headed to the training center in the area. As soon as he was inside, he was immediately met by a joyful girl who, holding out a registration form, said, "Hello, I am your guide to the best training center in New South Korea, Blackhead. My name is Yura." Smiling happily to attract new visitors, the girl pressed her presence on the guys and added, "I can help you." Continuing to follow his cousin, Hwang Ja-eun nervously exclaimed, "Blackhead to sign up. You need to meet the criteria and also have money. And you chose this place," to which Tae Hyun confidently replied, "Well, why else would you come here at that very moment?" Yura was surprised to think that the children. Trying not to offend the visitors, the girl shrugged and said awkwardly, "Hey kids, this is not the training center you're used to," to which Tae Hyun, holding out his SVIP card to her, said, "Please sign us both up." Continuing to hold the golden card he had received from the Alchemists Guild at eye level, Tae Hyun waited for the girl to change her mind and fulfill his request. As soon as Yura picked up Kim's card, Tae Hyun asked if it should be enough to check it out, so Tae Hyun signed a super VIP contract with the Alchemist Guild at the same moment and began to look at the card she had handed him. The girl thought that it was a card of one of the 4 Alchemist Guilds. The next moment, turning her gaze to the boy standing in front of her, she mentally added, "How does this boy know he is a student of some high-ranking player, or don't tell me he is the owner of this card?" Feeling very tense and realizing the difficulty of the choice, the girl mentally added, "But if I agree and something goes wrong, it will be a problem what to do." The next moment, a drugged man appeared behind the confused girl, laughed loudly, and said that Yura was in a difficult situation. As soon as everyone turned their attention to him, the man continued to pose and said, "Boogaloo, people, money alone is not enough to sign up with us," and Iron Strongman exclaimed in confusion. As soon as the man approached them, Hwang Ja-yeon exclaimed in confusion that Iron Strongman was a super cool name. What should we do now? And at the same time, he was disappointed. Looking at the man who continued to pose, Tae Hyun thought, "What kind of name is that? Is he crazy?" Continuing to introduce himself, the man said to you, "Iron Strongman, cultivator of beginners." Hearing this, the rest of the participants of the training center who were on the sidelines, looking back at Iron, were talking to Iron Strongman, "Poor guys." Continuing to pose and show off his muscles, Iron Strongman said, "Bugaga, you've seen how everyone is shaking at my name alone. If you back off now, then yes, I will forgive you." To which Tae Hyun replied, "What is this old man talking about?" Hearing what Tae Hyun had just said, Hwang Ja-yeon raised his hands in fright, but did not say a word so as not to escalate the situation, while Yura just continued to watch the situation anxiously. Also, unable to simply let the guy's words pass him by, Iron Strongman continued to demonstrate his muscles and said that you dared to call me weak. In response to the man's question, Tae Hyun smiled slyly and said, "Well, if you don't believe it, then we can bet that the loser will have to pay for a year's subscription." Hearing the offer from Tae Hyun, who decided to compete with him and the price of the bet, Iron Strongman confidently exclaimed, "You don't know your place at all, but then you're in the wrong place." Moving on to the competition simulator where they were to compete, Iron Strongman added, "Prove it to me." In order to move into the digital space to start the competition, the 2 candidates took their seats in the simulation chairs and connected to the system. At the same time, an image was displayed on the screen where all the fans could watch the progress of the competition. At the same moment, when he saw on the main screen where the 2 contestants had moved, Hwang Ja-yeon exclaimed in confusion what the abyss was. In response to the boy's question, Yura nervously replied to the recruiter's virtual reality program without taking his eyes off the broadcast, to which the recruiter replied in surprise. The Summoner is a virtual world that recreates the environment of the abyss for competitions that took place for various reasons. The main task in this competition was to destroy as many B-rank monsters as possible in the shortest possible time while holding a lot of weight on your back, which is the most popular way to establish a hierarchy within the training center. Seeing the message on the main screen that the game had just started, The girl didn't take her eyes off the table and added that against Iron Strongman, he simply had no chance of winning. As soon as the game started, the man used his muscle-building skill and plunged into battle to be the first to put several monsters to sleep and demonstrate his superiority. Continuing to destroy the monsters over and over again, the man confidently exclaimed, "Stupid boy, how dare you challenge me?" Continuing to destroy the monsters that got in his way, the pumped-up man angrily shouted out, "My muscle-building skill makes me invincible." By increasing the volume of his muscles, the man received a tremendous increase in his capabilities in this competition. The next moment, bouncing off the ground that was cracking under him, he added my mobility, the most powerful skill in the draft. Having made the second combo in the competition with Tae Hyun, the man headed to the next enemies and added, "And I have not yet told you how much weight I can pull from this world, so I will gratefully use the annual subscription."